Testing, English channel. Good morning. This is the 96th day of the Ukrainian resistance. This is Media Center Ukraine in Ukraine form. Our first guest today is Serhii Kuiun, an expert, director of A95 Consultancy Group. We will be talking about markets of oil and gas, energy markets, and about fuel. And fuel, as we know, is the blood of the economy. Serhii, the floor is yours. And our first question is, what's the status today of the fuel markets in Ukraine? Good morning. A couple of weeks ago, we met here and we discussed the problems. And at that time, we experienced the peak pressure on the markets, certain deficits, and we have a feeling that we passed the peak of that crisis. We can observe this by many factors. Yesterday, I drove around the city and around Kyiv Oblast, and the lines at the gas stations are substantially smaller. And this morning, I haven't seen any queues or lines of waiting cars for gas or fuel, diesel. So the market keeps working. 2 weeks ago, the government lifted the state regulations of prices, which was one of the reasons of insufficient supply, because lots of companies, especially small ones, like small and medium-sized gas station networks, were not able to supply fuel themselves because the prime cost was higher than the price that the cabinet ministers calculated. Now that we have lifted this state regulation, we have economic incentives to supply more proactively. Before this meeting, I looked at the statistics. The number of those who filed declarations on diesel fuel doubled compared to the beginning of this month. So with this fuel, early May, we had 30 companies that imported that fuel, diesel fuel. Yesterday, 66 of them filed declarations, doubled the figure, which proves that the market becomes more active. Slightly less picturesque situation is with gas, and with liquefied gas, the increase of those who filed declarations for independent importation increased 1.5 times. So something that we couldn't possibly perceive when the state regulation was on. Even though it's early to say that we reached the planned levels of supply, the better situation is with diesel fuel. There is slight deviation from the planned indicators, but also on liquefied gas, the situation is more or less okay, probably even the best. I've seen lots of gas stations without any queues or lines. So yeah, that's an expensive fuel, and it's almost close to benzene in energetic equivalent, but that's always an alternative, and this market operates quite well. Let me remind you that for liquefied gas, we didn't have state regulation of prices at all. So this market reoriented itself quite fast. Lots of gas traders had contracts, existing contracts with EU suppliers, something that benzene and diesel fuel suppliers didn't have. And they had the relevant transportation fleet available for expedite importation of liquefied gas from Europe. So this market oriented itself faster, and nothing prevented it in making proper pricing decisions, and it's delivered quite well. The largest lag from the plans and expectations is with benzines. Why so? Well, you need to recognize that the whole market of Europe is aimed at importation of diesel fuel. Diesel fuel is something that is the highest deficit in Europe, what they import the most. Ports, reservoirs, pipelines, the loading and downloading facilities, they are all focused on diesel fuel, while on petroleum, on benzene, the market was always in profit, well balanced, and actually we even exported benzene from Europe. But now there is more or less balance. Some of the European markets have nothing to export, and it's problematic for us to import from European ports because they have diesel logistics predominantly, while at the EU domestic markets, petrol is in deficit because the priority for those countries are their domestic consumers. So for petrols, for benzines, the situation is very tense indeed. This radius of search for petrol keeps growing. For instance, in May, we started receiving supplies produced from Belgium. So we'll be driving our cars using Belgium petrol. If somebody would tell me this a year ago, I would never have believed that. But that's a reality now. So there's deficit of petrol pushes the companies to increase the radius of search for this product. Well, let me clarify the question then. Before this invasion, we have worked using mostly Belarus or Russian fuel and petrol in particular, but whose petrol will start consuming now? What are the plans for opening our own refineries, and what should be the prices for the consumers to expect domestically? It's early to say about this configuration. The search for resources and the shaping of this new market, which, let me remind you that we lost 100% sources of our pre-war supplies. 80% of those import and 20% domestic production. All that has been destroyed. It's not there. So we need to start from scratch. And this will be a long-term process. What we see now, at the first stages, of course, the major fuel resources we searched in neighboring countries, Romania, Poland, Slovak Republic, to a certain extent. But now we can see that those countries cannot meet the demands we have domestically. Why? Because those countries want as their priority to ensure the supply to their own domestic consumers. For instance, a Polish deficit is 7 million tons of light products a year, while our consumption is expected at the level of 6 million tons. That is to say, Poles have to find 7 million for themselves at the external markets and bring 2 or 3 million to us across their territory. So that's quite a tough task, and obviously they will be catering to their own needs. So this search will continue because we have a signal from Romania in summertime because of the increase in the seasonal consumption. They also want to restrict for the Ukrainian companies the handling of tankers. Moldova, we can also observe, being a transit country for us, it's also is, we got signals that they will start restricting such supplies because of their own internal needs. So we'll keep searching. We cover all of the Europe now, and most likely, we will have to bring from afar, and as precedent from Belgium, petrol, that's Arak region, Amsterdam, Antwerpen, Rotterdam. A big oil hub with lots of products available, but a very difficult logistics. Because it's a comprehensive one. First maritime, then railway. You need to cross a couple of countries. Well, let me illustrate with an example. Those Belgium supplies were contracted early March, and they arrived here in 2 months' time. So you can see how difficult it is to rebuild this European mechanism, this puzzle that has been created for dozens of years. And now we need to find where we fit, and we come across nuances at every step. It's tough to say what would be the ultimate configuration, but the Europeans find it difficult to redesign it. Even material incentives do not stimulate them. Ports, railway, offloading, downloading, handling facilities, they all work with lots of difficulties. So we will not build this system that fast. It will keep being transformed. It's not going to be fast. I believe if we get minimum levels of our consumption, and then we'll have to wait until July to reach those needed levels. And the government also now is, along with traders, are researching the possibilities that in August, September we'll have an increased seasonal demand because of the harvest time. Well, that's seasonal increase. So we'll have to have more fuel available, and before July we'll only reach minimal needed ones. So we'll have 10 months of searching for those resources ahead of us, and most importantly, bringing them all the way to Ukraine. But the game is afoot, and quite positive dynamics. Before I let others ask questions, here's the last one from me. If we get from the strategy and philosophy level down to pieces of advice, what three pieces of advice would you share to improve the situation in the market? Well, everything that needs to be done now is what the government is doing anyway. They have the operational headquarters established, which was done back in March. So the system is there. There are daily meetings. Some days we have 2 staff meetings a day. So we keep close contact with the market. Prime Minister got involved a couple of times. Vitaly Klitschko, Kyiv mayor, upon request from traders, have contacted the owners of German terminals to reiterate the importance of such supplies to the capital, to Kyiv. So everyone is involved. Everyone who can be involved are. And the major problem doesn't lie in Ukraine. It comes from Europe. What they have in Europe, they have a very clear business which has been designed and built for so many years. The train leaves at the same time, goes from A to B, and now Ukraine mixes it all. They say between A and B, just let us squeeze somewhere in the middle and get our share of supplies. And also there is quite a concerning situation because of the possibility of imposing embargo on Russian fuel. So lots of players are afraid of changes, and probably that there would be lack of oil products, especially. That's why lots of countries, well, something that had to be done, and what we did, Ukraine has requested assistance from the EU countries, asking them to allocate from their reserves some petrol limits that we require the most. Poland provided 25,000 tons, confirmed them, but again, that's great, but we need to bring all that. Logistically speaking, it's an uphill battle. Hopefully, well, some of the countries refuse, well, the way I understand it, or at least ignored the requests. Well, because there are various expectations about what might happen after the imposing of embargo. That's why everyone keeps reserves to meet the needs of their own consumers. And then there is a mundane daily work with railway, port facilities in Romania, Lithuania, Poland. Now with Italian ports, we started working with them. So lots of issues that we try to resolve on a daily basis. Our ministries, well, a tanker has been stuck somewhere or it's not being offloaded, and then manually the officials try just pushing them into that port uh, to be taken care of. So all those efforts would ultimately allow us to have new, powerful, and diversified mechanism of supplies. Questions from the audience, please? Tell us, please, on the supply, which regions are better, which are worse in terms of supply of fuel? Is it because of the geography, dangerous locations, or the suppliers that operate there? Thank you. It's tough to say. How can you evaluate this deficit by the length of the line? In Kyiv, that's 20 cars. In Kirovograd, Kropivnitsky, that's 100 cars. Well, uh, the situation is better in the western Ukraine. It's quite obvious why. Everything comes across the western border. So you immediately get to the market, and it's profitable for you to sell there, because bringing to Poltava or to Dnipro, that adds 3 more hryvnias on 1 liter. So the farther it's from the western region, the less profitable it is for the suppliers, and that's why the western situation has more or less a good situation, even though now, after the lifting of the state regulations, the companies can handle those extra 3 hryvnias. Also, I can see that Kyiv gets enough fuel supplies. Some of my friends have 200 liters stored in their garages. Uh, uh, my company has a contract with one of the networks of gas stations, and only for business cars. But already private cars are being served there with extra canisters. So this craze is over. Those who had to store, well, 200-liter barrels of gas. Come on, how could they handle it on the gas station? But they did. So slowly but surely, this wave is going down. Any other questions? If not, my last question to you. Let me clarify something. Well, if we're bringing Belgium petrol, Polish petrol from elsewhere, so what would be the price? Is it going to be European? What price the Ukrainians should be expected to see? We are building the new market, and the turbulence that we live through is a precedent for us. We have never lived under such deficit. We have never observed such a hike in prices. Before the war, if the price would go up by 1 hryvnia, I would have my phone constantly ringing with questions, what's going on. But now the price doubled, and people still keep searching the fuel. Nobody asks the question, why so expensive? Because everybody recognizes that it's better to have fuel, and the price is secondary. What I'm driving at, this lifting of the decision to lift the state regulation allows the market to set market prices. The companies can see how fast the demand increases, how much reserves do they have. Increase the price, less sales. Lesser price, more supplies, stockpiling. So that's the idea. So at some point of time, the prices will start going down to the objective market level, as it used to be before. So the objective price, uh, well, the fair price under state regulations was 40 to 45 per liter with all the add-ons. But that price was fair for stable, well-supplied markets. It's not what we have now. That's why we need to reduce the consumption. We need to curb down the demand. For the time being, we'll have high prices. 52 to 55 hryvnias per petrol, 60-65 per for diesel. Well, the market feels okay with such prices. The queues, the lines go down, so the market has sensed this point of balance, and hopefully the market will start getting saturated with new supplies of fuel, which will help to reduce the price to some objective levels. Thank you. That was Serhii Kuiun, expert and A95 Consultancy Group director. We discussed with him the situation with fuel at the Ukrainian market. Our next speaker, Ivan Fedorov, Melitopol mayor. He would be online. Why it's interesting? Because this morning there was an explosion in Melitopol, close to the building where the appointed by the occupiers new so-called mayor was located. So we'll discuss this with the mayor. See you soon.